The night felt normal when I went to sleep. I had set up my small campsite deep inside Everglades National Park, far from the main trails where most tourists stay. Just swamp, water, and miles of trees. The sounds of the Everglades at night are usually constant: frogs croaking, insects buzzing, something always moving in the water. But sometime after midnight, I woke up, and the first thing I noticed was the silence. The swamp had gone quiet completely. No frogs, no insects, nothing. Then the smell hit me. It was horrible, like rotten garbage mixed with wet animal fur. At first I thought something had died near my campsite, maybe a wild hog, but the smell kept getting stronger, so strong it pushed through the thin walls of my tent. And then I heard something move out in the swamp. A slow step through shallow water, splash, a pause, then another heavy step, splash. Whatever was out there, it was big, and for the first time that night, a strange thought crossed my mind. A story I had earlier heard that day about a creature people claim lives in the Florida swamps. A creature they say you always smell before you ever see it. The skunk ape. I stayed perfectly still inside my tent, listening. The swamp outside remained silent. No frogs, no insects, just the slow movement of water where somewhere beyond the trees. Splash, then nothing. I held my breath, hoping whatever was out there would just keep moving. Maybe it was a gator sliding through the marsh, maybe a wild hog crossing the water. But the smell kept getting worse, thicker, stronger, like something large and wet had been living in it for days. Then the sound came again, splash, closer this time, much closer. I slowly reached for my flashlight, trying not to make a sound. The thin walls of the tent suddenly felt useless, like they couldn't protect me from anything outside. Another step moved through the swamp water, and this time I heard something else with it. Breathing, deep, slow, heavy breathing coming from somewhere just beyond the trees surrounding my campsite in Everglades National Park. The kind of breathing that only something very large could make. And suddenly I had a terrible feeling. Whatever was moving through the swamp wasn't just passing by, it was circling my camp. And the creature people whisper about in these swamps, the skunk ape, might be real. The flashlight trembled in my hand as I unzipped the tent just enough to peek outside. Moonlight spilled across the swamp, reflecting faintly on the shallow water and the twisted roots of the cypress trees. At first I didn't see anything, just shadows stretching across the water. The still trees, the faint outlines of my campsite. Then a movement caught my eye. A dark shape stepped out of the shadows, moving slowly through the shallow water. I froze. The shape straightened and my heart sank. It was enormous, easily 8 feet tall, maybe more. Thick, matted fur hung in clumps across its broad shoulders and long arms. The smell hit me again, stronger now. Rotten, musky, unbearable. It wasn't running, it wasn't hiding. It was just watching me, eyes glinting in the moonlight, intelligent, curious. And in that moment I realized I was staring at the skunk ape, the creature that had haunted stories and warnings about these swamps. And now it was real. I couldn't move, not a muscle, not a single finger. The flashlight in my hand was trembling, and even though I wanted to put it directly at the creature, I dared not. The beam cut a thin line across the swamp, illuminating the shallow water, the twisted cypress knees, the hanging Spanish moss. but it was the shadow that stood in the moonlight that held my gaze. The skunk ape didn't flinch. Its massive head tilted slowly, just slightly, like it was studying me, not as prey, not as a threat, but as something new, something it couldn't quite categorize. Every detail of it was overwhelming: the thick, matted fur that hung in dark clumps, the long arms brushing the water, the shoulders broad enough to block the moonlight entirely, and the smell, that smell that clawed at my nostrils and burned my throat. Then it stepped closer, careful, precise. The water rippled around its massive legs, sending soft waves across the shallow swamp. The moonlight caught its eye for a brief moment, dark, deep, intelligent, and it felt like it was looking not at me, but through me, into some part of myself I didn't even know existed. I realized then that the silence wasn't emptiness. The swamp wasn't asleep. It had paused. Every sound, every insect, every bird, all gone. The forest itself was holding its breath, waiting, watching. I tried to breathe slowly. One, two, three, but the air felt thick, almost viscous, as though the smell had seeped into my lungs. My throat burned, my eyes watered, and yet I couldn't look away. A low rumble rose from its chest, deep enough to vibrate through the water and into my bones. It wasn't a growl, not exactly, more like a warning, a vibration that whispered, "This is my swamp. You are here. You are allowed, but be careful." Then, almost imperceptibly, it leaned forward. Its massive hands touched the water, stirring mud and leaves, lifting the scent higher. For a moment it looked human, thoughtful, curious, hesitant. The sheer intelligence in its movements made my head spin. And just when I thought I might finally be able to move, a second sound broke the tension. A faint splash from deeper in the swamp. Something else was out there, something smaller, something that had been hiding, and immediately the skunk ape stiffened. Its head snapped toward the sound, shoulders tense, nostrils flaring, and for the first time I saw warning in its eyes, not for me, but for whatever was approaching. It was then I understood. It wasn't hunting me, it wasn't stalking me, it was guarding, and whatever was moving through those dark waters, it dared not step closer. The night stretched on, endless, thick, and dripping with swamp water and fear. The skunk ape stayed just at the edge of the moonlight, every motion deliberate, every glance precise, like a sentinel in a world that had forgotten me. I realized in that moment that I had been allowed into its world temporarily, and if I made one wrong move, it wouldn't hesitate. I wanted to speak, to tell it I wasn't a threat, but no words came. The swamp swallowed my voice before it even left my throat. And I understood something else. This creature, this guardian of the Everglades, it remembered everything, every sound, every movement, every human foolish enough to wander into its domain. And tonight, I had become part of its memory. I didn't dare move, not a step, not a twitch. The swamp held its breath. Every sound seemed muted, as though the very air had thickened around me. My flashlight shook slightly in my grip, but I forced myself to keep it steady, scanning the moonlit water, the twisted cypress knees, and the shadows that stretched endlessly into the swamp. The skunk ape stayed where it was, its enormous form half submerged in the shallow water. Every movement was deliberate, careful, deliberate again, as if it measured the air, the earth, and me all at once. Its long arms dipped into the water, sending ripples that stretched outward. The smell grew more potent, clinging to me, making my stomach twist, but I couldn't pull away. I was trapped in its gaze, and for a horrifying, exhilarating moment, I felt its awareness wrap around me like the humid night. Then the swamp moved again. From deeper in the water, something shifted. A smaller shape, maybe a juvenile or another skunk ape, stepped into view. Its movements were cautious, almost timid. The larger creature stiffened, every hair on its body bristled, the dark fur shifting with tension, its head swiveled slowly, eyes locked on the new arrival. A low rumble echoed from its chest, a deep, vibrating warning, not at me, not at the swamp itself, but at the newcomer. Whatever this second creature was, it hesitated. The water barely moved as it shifted backward, unwilling to advance further. And then it happened. The skunk ape exhaled slowly, deliberately. That heavy, musky breath rolled across the swamp, carrying a message I could not decode, but somehow understood. This is my territory. You do not pass. The smaller creature froze, and for a moment that felt like hours, it turned and retreated silently into the dark recess of the swamp. I was left alone with the larger skunk ape, and the air felt impossibly thick. My mind raced. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I knew that running was the exact opposite of what I should do. The creature hadn't attacked. It hadn't threatened me. It had simply judged me, allowed me, tolerated me. Then, slowly, it began to move, not toward me, not away, but along the shallow water, pacing with deliberate slowness. Each step was careful, measured. The swamp water splashed softly around its massive feet, and with each motion, the creature seemed to study me, memorizing every detail, my posture, my hesitation, my fear. I realized something I hadn't before. I was not a trespasser in this swamp. I was a witness, and every witness in its world left a mark. The night stretched endlessly, shadows shifted, mist rose from the water, curling around roots and hanging moss. My pulse thundered in my eyes, but the skunk ape moved silently, purposefully, like a ghost made of fur and muscle. I couldn't look away. I didn't want to. And yet, somewhere deep in my mind, a terrifying truth took hold. This was far from over. The swamp was alive, and I was only a visitor. The skunk ape was not finished with me. Not yet. The swamp seemed to close in around me. Every sound, every shadow, every ripple of water felt magnified. My flashlight barely penetrated the darkness, and yet the skunk ape moved with uncanny precision, stepping lightly on soft mud, pressing through the shallow water as though it knew every inch of its domain. I couldn't take my eyes off it. Its massive form glided between the cypress knees, the long arms swinging slowly, dragging water, sending faint ripples outward. The smell hit me again, so strong it burned my throat. But now there was something else beneath it, the scent of earth, wet fur, and something raw, primal, almost human. It was a living reminder that I was deep inside a world that wasn't mine. Then it stopped, head turned sharply, nostrils flaring, its eyes glinted in the moonlight. I followed its gaze, and there it was, a small, narrow path through the swamp, just barely visible under the thin mist curling above the water. Something moved along it, something smaller, another creature or just a shadow. A low rumble vibrated through the air, deep enough to make my chest shake. The skunk ape's massive shoulders tensed. It let out a long, slow exhale, part warning, part curiosity. Whatever was there, it didn't advance. Whatever hierarchy existed in this swamp, I understood now that the skunk ape commanded it. I wanted to step back, to retreat, but my body refused. I was frozen, not out of fear, at least, not entirely, but because every instinct told me I needed some to observe, I needed to remember. Then, without warning, the skunk ape pivoted, slowly, gracefully. Its enormous head turned toward me. I thought it would lunge, but it didn't. Instead, it studied me. Every movement, every hesitation, every subtle shift of my expression captured by eyes that were dark, intelligent, and almost unbearably aware. I realized something terrifying in that moment. The creature wasn't just watching the swamp, it was watching me, and I could feel the weight of that attention pressing into my chest. Not threatening, not hostile, but deliberate. A presence that could crush me in a heartbeat if it chose, but hadn't. Then it stepped back slightly, almost as if it was giving me permission to breathe, to exist, but I knew better. This was temporary, a fragile truce in the swamp that it ruled utterly. The night pressed on, mist thickened, shadows grew longer, and I understood with bone-deep certainty that the skunk ape's curiosity had only just begun. I was not going to leave this swamp unchanged. The skunk ape lingered just at the edge of the moonlight, massive shoulders hunched slightly, nostrils flaring as it continued to study me, every subtle movement of its body, the way it shifted weight from one foot to another, the slow swing of its long arms, the barely perceptible tilt of its head, felt like a message I wasn't meant to fully understand. The swamp air was thick, humid, heavy with that unmistakable scent of wet fur and rot. I could feel it clinging to my skin, my hair, even my lungs. Each inhalation was a struggle, but I couldn't step back, not yet. My body, though trembling, was locked in place by fascination and fear. Then the creature made a low, deliberate sound, a rumble deep in its chest that vibrated through the swamp water and into my very bones. It wasn't a growl, not really. It was something older, something that belonged to the swamp itself. A signal, maybe, or a warning. I couldn't tell. But whatever it was, it made the air pulse around me, and I felt every ounce of my courage drain in a single heartbeat. For a long moment we just stood there. The only movement was the mist curling across the water, twisting around the cypress knees, drifting like smoke between us. Then almost imperceptibly the skunk ape shifted closer. Each step was careful, deliberate. The water splashed softly beneath its massive feet, sending tiny waves across the shallow swamp. Its eyes never left mine, and I felt as though they were looking straight through me, mirroring my heartbeat, my fear, my hesitation. I wanted to speak, to tell it I wasn't a threat, but my voice was gone. My throat had locked up, stiff and raw. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I knew better. The swamp was its world, and I was nothing but an intruder passing through. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, it reached one massive hand toward me. Not a swipe, not a strike, just a gesture, curious, probing, deliberate. Its fingers hovered over the water, tracing small ripples in my direction as if testing the distance between us, testing me. Time slowed, the moonlight glinted off the wet fur, highlighting muscles and sinew that should not exist in a creature this size. I could see every detail now: the texture of its fur, the scars along its arms, the sheer weight on its shoulders. This was no animal. This was something ancient, intelligent, something that had existed long before I had ever set foot in this swamp. And for the first time, I understood something horrifying. This encounter wasn't about fear. It wasn't about danger. It was about recognition. The skunk ape had noticed me and had decided I was worthy of being seen, and the swamp had decided I was worthy of being remembered. The air grew heavier, almost suffocating, as if the swamp itself had pressed in around me. Every leaf, every twisted root, every ripple in the shallow water seemed amplified, vibrating with an energy I could feel in my bones. The skunk ape remained still for a heartbeat longer, its massive body looming in the moonlight. Then it moved again, slowly, deliberately, like a shadow gliding across the marsh. Its steps were careful, each footfall barely disturbing the water, yet I could feel the force of its presence radiating outward, the mist curled around its limbs like smoke, clinging to its fur, making it seem even larger, more spectral. And then I noticed the eyes again, dark, deep, intelligent. They weren't just watching me, they were studying the swamp itself, reading as it were a map etched into the very soil. I wanted to blink, to turn away, but I couldn't. Every instinct screamed both fear and fascination. Then the skunk ape did something I will never forget. It lifted one massive hand, hovering over the water, and slowly pressed it down into the surface. The ripples spread outward, distorting the moonlight, shaking the reflection of the trees. I realized it wasn't just moving through the swamp, it was communicating. Every ripple, every subtle motion seemed intentional, as if the swamp and the creator were own one entity, and I had just stumbled into its command. A sudden noise broke the tension, a distant splash, a branch snapping somewhere deeper in the swamp. The skunk ape's head snapped toward it, nostrils flaring, its breathing quickened, and its stance shifted, muscles coiling like a predator, ready to strike, but not at me. The warning was for whatever dared intrude into its territory, and the smaller ripples in the water vanished, swallowed by the thick darkness. I was frozen, unable to move. As the creature returned its gaze to me, the intensity of it pressed against my chest, a weight I couldn't escape. Every hair on my arm stood on end. I realized with a chill I couldn't shake that the skunk ape could crush me in a heartbeat, yet it hadn't, not once. Every movement, every breath, every glance was deliberate. And then, slowly, it took a step back, just one step, measured, deliberate. But it was enough to remind me I was still in its swamp, its world, and in this world, nothing happened by accident. The mist thickened, the swamp seemed to hum, alive with unseen movement. I felt utterly small, utterly exposed, and yet somehow privileged. This was a creature of legend, a sentinel of the Everglades, and it had allowed me to witness it. But I also knew something I couldn't ignore. The night was far from over. The skunk ape had not finished with me. It never did. The swamp seemed to breathe around me, thick mist curling in spirals about the shallow water, clinging to every branch, every leaf of cypress, every tangled vine. The skunk ape remained in the moonlight, massive shoulders hunched, head tilted slightly as if listening to the pulse of the swamp itself. I could feel its attention settle on me again, pressing into my chest like the weight of the humid night. Then it moved closer, slowly, purposefully. Each step sent small ripples across the water, each ripple carrying a vibration I could feel in my bones, Its eyes never left mine, dark and impossibly intelligent, observing, weighing. The smell grew stronger, more pungent, almost unbearable, but somehow I couldn't turn away. Every instinct told me to run, but every fiber of my being screamed that moving now would be a mistake. The creature stopped just a few feet from the edge of my camp. Its massive hand hovered over the water, fingers slowly flexing. I realized it was testing me, measuring me, probing the air around me, perhaps trying to understand who I was, what I wanted, why I was there. I wanted to speak, to reassure it, to beg it to let me leave, but no sound came. My voice was gone, stolen by tension in the night, the overwhelming presence of this creature, the swamp itself, alive and watching. Then it bent slightly, almost imperceptibly, and pressed on an enormous hand into the water. The ripples radiated outward, distorting the reflection of the moon and stars, and I understood in that instant this wasn't just a movement. It was communication. It was a gesture, a test. The swamp seemed to close in entirely around me, mist thickening so much that it felt like wading through clouds. Every leaf, every cypress knee, every ripple of water carried weight as if the Everglades itself was holding its breath. The skunk ape stood just beyond the edge of my camp, massive and still, its form both shadow and substance under the pale moonlight. It moved again, slowly, deliberately, each footfall sending subtle ripples across the water, each step a measured assertion of dominion, its eyes locked on mine, unblinking, intelligent, dark. I felt them probing, cataloging, remembering. Then, unexpectedly, it leaned slightly forward, the massive hand hovered over the water, dragging slowly through it, creating concentric circles that stretched outward. I realized in a cold jolt of awareness this wasn't just movement, it was communication, a warning, a demonstration, a measure of me, a test. I was intruding in a world older than time itself, a world where I was both insignificant and impossibly visible. It moved once more, stepping back slowly, a deliberate retreat that left the air between us charged, heavy and almost sacred. The mist swallowed its form gradually until only the faintest outline remained, and finally it was gone, melting into the darkness of the swamp. I stayed frozen for what felt like hours, listening to the swamp breathe, listening to the faint echoes of water rippling, trying to convince myself it was real, that I hadn't imagined the intelligence, the presence, the ancient power of the creature I had just encountered. Eventually, I dared to move, my body stiff, heart hammering, lungs tight. Every step I took felt like trespassing in a world that did not belong to me, and even as I packed my camp and retreated from the swamp, I knew one immutable truth. I had not just seen a legend, I had walked among it. The skunk ape of the Everglades, the sentinel of the swamp, was real, and it had remembered me.